You probably don't realize this, but when Donald Trump demanded $2.8 trillion from Canada last week, he wasn't negotiating. He was unraveling the fabric of America's global economic power, and he didn't even know it. This wasn't a standard trade dispute. It was a diplomatic meltdown on a grand scale. And what followed, Mark Carney's three-word response, didn't just go viral. It exposed something far bigger, something that most people have been too afraid to say out loud. America's influence isn't what it used to be. Why does this matter to you? Because the power dynamics shaping global trade right now aren't what you've been told. This moment, as shocking as it sounds, could signal the beginning of a new era where American strength is no longer a given. And what happened next? Well, that's where the real story begins. Stick around, because this is about to flip everything you thought you knew on its head. You've heard about the $2.8 trillion demand, but what most people miss is the bigger picture. This wasn't just about a number. It wasn't about trade imbalances or resource agreements. This was about America's credibility, or more accurately, the collapse of it. And here's the kicker. This isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a much larger pattern, one that's been building for years. America's global influence isn't waning by accident. It's the result of decisions that are catching up now, fast. So what does that mean for the average person, you? It means that the way the world sees America's strength is shifting. No longer can the U.S. simply make demands and expect others to comply without question. The world is starting to push back. And when that happens, it doesn't just affect governments. It affects markets, jobs, and even your future investments. And that's where Mark Carney comes in. His three-word reply didn't just challenge a claim. It exposed the cracks in America's approach. The kind of cracks that, if left unchecked, could spread far beyond this one incident. So let's break down exactly what happened here and why you should care, because this story, it's about more than trade. It's about the future of global power itself. Here's the claim that sent shockwaves through the trade world: $2.8 trillion. That's what Donald Trump demanded from Canada, claiming it was overdue compensation for years of trade imbalances. At first, it sounded like a bold move, right? But here's the thing. Trump didn't have any evidence to back it up. No numbers, no documents, just a number pulled out of thin air. And when Canada asked for the proof, what did Washington do? They didn't provide evidence. They evaded. But here's what's critical. What Carney did next. Instead of getting caught up in a heated debate or giving an angry retort, Carney did something far more powerful. He simply said, "Show your work." And those three words, they went viral, but not because they were snappy. They went viral because they shattered the illusion. They forced everyone to ask the question, what kind of world are we living in where the U.S. can throw around trillions of dollars in claims without backing them up? Notice what's missing here. No response from the U.S. that actually explains the claim. There's no economic analysis, no trade data, nothing. Just pure assertion, hoping no one would ask for the proof. That's the moment everything changed. And here's where it gets worse. This wasn't just a fluke. This exposed a systemic issue, one that has been brewing for years. Now, let's put this into perspective. Think about the global reaction. Allies, partners, even neutral countries started looking at the United States in a new light. If the U.S. couldn't back up a claim against Canada, its closest neighbor and ally, what did that say about everything else it claimed? Suddenly, the world wasn't just questioning American trade policies. They were questioning American competence. What you need to understand here is that this isn't an isolated event. It's the latest chapter in a vast pattern of erosion. Think about past U.S. foreign policy. Once America's economic power was unquestioned, the world complied, not just out of respect for its market size or military might, but because American institutions were credible. But now that credibility is being systematically stripped away. And that's where this gets even more dangerous. The moment other countries start hedging their bets, when they stop relying on your numbers, your data, your word, everything starts to shift. What happens if this continues? If countries start to plan around the U.S. instead of with it, the ripple effects will be far-reaching, and you could feel the consequences. But stay tuned, because this is just the beginning. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. In the days that followed, the U.S. didn't just ignore the request for proof. It doubled down. Instead of offering a detailed economic analysis to support Trump's $2.8 trillion claim, U.S. officials from the Treasury Department to the Commerce Department gave nothing but vague responses. Ongoing review, they said. Classified methodologies, they claimed. Proprietary calculations, they asserted. In other words, no proof, no substance, just a show. An elaborate performance designed to sound authoritative without being based in reality. And that's exactly what exposed the entire flaw in America's current approach to global diplomacy. You can't just assert authority without backing it up, especially when you're dealing with sophisticated, serious partners like Canada, and the world is watching. Carney saw this immediately, and that's what made his 3 words so powerful. It wasn't just about demanding evidence, it was about pointing out the gap between what the U.S. is claiming and the reality of its diplomatic and economic infrastructure. And once that gap was exposed, the global community couldn't unsee it. Now, you might be thinking, isn't this just a diplomatic spat? Here's why that's wrong. When you can't justify a massive demand from a close ally, it signals a fundamental shift in how the world sees your power. It's not just about this one claim, it's about the broader erosion of the U.S.'s ability to lead with authority. And once that perception takes hold, it changes everything. Now let's look at what happened in the days that followed. It wasn't just a failure of American diplomacy, and it became a cascade of failures. First, the U.S. couldn't provide any evidence to back up the $2.8 trillion claim. Then Canada responded with its own comprehensive analysis, showing that not only was the demand inaccurate, but it was also fundamentally misunderstanding the economic relationship between the two countries. But it didn't stop there. Other global partners started to take notice. European allies who were already skeptical of American trade policy now began openly questioning the competence of the U.S. government. Asian countries, cautious as always, started asking for third-party verification of American economic data before entering negotiations. Even Mexico, usually at the mercy of U.S. demands, began pushing for independent arbitration in trade disputes. What you're seeing here is collateral damage on a global scale. The immediate fallout: the U.S. was no longer the unquestioned leader in trade negotiations. The ripple effects from this one moment in the spotlight have already started to reshape global strategies. If this continues, it's not just about trade wars or tariffs, it's about trust. And once you lose that, the entire system starts to fall apart. What happens when the world no longer sees the U.S. as the dominant economic power? Well, that's what we're starting to witness now. The question is, how far can this go before everyone stops taking the U.S. seriously? So what happens next? Now that the world has seen the cracks in America's economic leadership, there are 2 paths forward, and both of them are fraught with risk. First, the U.S. could try to double down. More threats, more pressure, more empty assertions, hoping the world will fall in line. But here's the problem. When you start losing credibility, every move you make is now scrutinized. Every threat is met with doubt, and sooner or later, that kind of approach stops working. It leads to isolation, where America's voice becomes just one among many, not the voice that everyone listens to. The world moves on, and the U.S. becomes increasingly irrelevant in shaping the global economic future. But there's another path, one that requires humility, patience, and a recognition that America needs to rebuild its institutional strength. Instead of demanding, the U.S. would have to rebuild trust through transparency, accountability, and consistent leadership. This path would require long-term investment in strengthening the very systems that made America a global leader in the first place. It would mean valuing evidence over rhetoric and expertise over ideology. It's a hard road, but it's the only one that could restore America's credibility on the world stage. The question is, does America have the will to take that second path? Because if it doesn't, the world will keep moving forward without it. And once that momentum builds, there may be no going back. Here's the bottom line. What happened between Trump and Carney wasn't just a diplomatic embarrassment. It was a wake-up call for American leadership. A moment when the world saw the gap now between what the U.S. is trying to project and the reality of its declining influence. Carney's 3 words, "show your work," didn't just call out a mistake. They crystallized a fundamental truth that no one can ignore anymore. For decades, America didn't just lead because of its military or market size. It led because its institutions were seen as the gold standard for credibility and expertise. But now, as those institutions falter, so does America's ability to lead. The world no longer trusts a superpower that can't back up its claims. And as global trust in the U.S. continues to erode, the question becomes, can America ever regain that credibility, or has the damage been done? Carney's words, in their simple power, might just be the most important reality check America's economic leadership has had in years. And if that truth isn't faced head-on, the next time America tries to make a demand like this, it won't just fall flat, it might backfire. The world won't just be skeptical, it will stop listening. So here's where things stand. America's global future hangs on the ability to rebuild trust, restore credibility, and take the hard road back to being the serious economic leader it once was. Will it happen? That's the question the world is waiting to see. And if you want to follow the unfolding story of America's place on the global stage, make sure to subscribe for continued analysis. Because trust me, this is only the beginning.